Hello, BookTube. It's time for another essay, and today I'm going to read My Books by George Gissing. It was originally published in his book, The Private Papers of Henry Rycroft, and this edition is Essays of Today. That was edited by, or selected by F.W. Pritchard. It's George G. Harrop and Company, and mine is the April 1925 printing, which is the fourth printing, originally done in March 1923. George Gissing he wrote 20-some novels, but he lived in the second half of the 19th century, dying just, I think, a few years into the 20th century. His best-known work is basically New Grub Street. It's in the, I think it's still in the Black Penguins. I do want to read more of him. I'm interested in him. He might not be the best stylist out there, but I think there's a lot to be said for his writing and his life. So here we go. My books, George Gissing. As often as I survey my bookshelves, I am reminded of Lamb's Ragged Veterans. Not that all my volumes came from the second-hand stall. Many of them were neat enough in new covers. Some were even stately in fragrant bindings when they passed into my hands. But so often have I removed, so rough has been the treatment of my little library at each change of place, and to tell the truth, so little care I have given to its well-being at normal times. For all practical matters, I am idle and inept. That even the comeliest of my books show the results of unfair usage. More than one has been foully injured by a great nail driven into a packing case, this but the extreme instance of the wrongs they have undergone. Now that I have leisure and peace of mind, I find myself growing more careful, an illustration of the great truth that virtue is made easy by circumstance. But I confess that so long as a volume hold together, I am not much trouble as to its outer appearance. I know men who say they had as lief read any book in a library copy as in one from their own shelf. To me, that is unintelligible. Well, that sentence was to me as well. For one thing, I know every book of mine by its scent, and I have but to put my nose between the pages and to be remembered of all sorts of things. My Gibbon, for example, my well-bound 8-volume Milman edition, which I have read and read and read again for more than 30 years. Never do I open it, but the scent of the noble page restores to me the exultant happiness of the moment when I received it as a prize. Or my Shakespeare, the great Cambridge Shakespeare. It has an odor which carries me yet further back in life. For these volumes belonged to my father, and before I was old enough to read them with understanding, it was often permitted me, as a treat, to take down one of them from the bookcase and reverently to turn the leaves. The volumes smell exactly as they did in that old time, and what a strange tenderness comes upon me when I hold one of them in my hand. For that reason, I do not often read Shakespeare in this edition. My eyes being good as ever, I take the Globe volume, which I bought in days when such a purchase was something more than an extravagance. Wherefore, I regard the book with that particular affection which results from sacrifice. Sacrifice, in no drawing-room sense of the word. Dozens of my books were purchased with money which ought to have been spent upon what are called the necessities of life. Many a time I have stood before a stall or a bookseller's window, torn by conflict of intellectual desire and bodily need. At the very hour of dinner, when my stomach clamored for food, I have been stopped by a sight of a volume so long coveted and marked at so advantageous a price that I could not let it go. Yet to buy it meant pangs of famine. My Haynes Tibullus was grasped at such a moment. It lay on the stall of the old bookshop in Goodge Street. a stall where now and then one found an excellent thing among quantities of rubbish. 6 pence was the price. 6 pence. At that time I used to eat my midday meal, of course my dinner, at a coffee shop in Oxford Street, one of the real old coffee shops such as now I suppose can hardly be found. 6 pence was all I had, yes, and all I had in the world. It would purchase a plate of meat and vegetables, but I did not dare to hope that the Tibulus would wait until tomorrow when a certain small sum fell due to me. I paced the pavement, fingering the coppers in my pocket, eyeing the stall, two appetites at combat within me. The book was bought, and I went home with it, and as I made a dinner of bread and butter, I gloated over the pages. It was Tibulus I found penciled on the last page. In this Tibulus I found penciled in the last page, Perigli, October 4th, 1792. Who was that possessor of the book nearly 100 years ago? There was no other inscription. I like to imagine some poor scholar, poor and eager as myself, who bought the volume with drops of blood and enjoyed the reading of it as I did. How often that was I could not easily say. Gentle-hearted Tibulus, of whom there remains to us a poet's portrait more delightful, I think, than anything in the kind in Roman literature. So with many another book on the thronged shelves, to take them down is to recall how vividly a struggle and a triumph. In those days, money represented nothing to me, nothing I care about or to think about but the acquisition of books. There were books of which I had passionate need. Books were necessary to me more necessary to me than bodily nourishment. I could see them, of course, at the British Museum, but that was not at all the same thing as having and holding them, my property, on my own shelf. Now and then I have bought a volume of the raggedest and wretchedest aspect, dishonored with foolish scribbling, torn, blotted, no matter. I liked better to read out of that than out of a copy that was not mine. But I was guilty at times of mere self-indulgence. A book tempted me, a book which was not one of those for which I really craved, a luxury which prudence might bid me forego, as for instance my Young Stilling. It caught my eye in the Holywell Street. The name was familiar to me in Vorheit und Dichtung, and curiosity grew as I glanced over the pages. But that day I resisted. In truth, I could not afford the 18 pence, which means that just then I was poor indeed. Twice again did I pass, each time assuring myself that Young Stilling had found no purchaser. There came a day when I was in funds. I see myself hastening to Holywell Street. In those days my habitual pace was 5 miles an hour. I see the little grey old man with whom I transacted my business. What was his name? The bookseller, who had been, I believe, a Catholic priest and still had a certain priestly dignity about him. He took the volume, opened it, mused for a moment, then with a glance at me said, as if thinking aloud, "Yes, I wish I had time to read it." Sometimes I added the labor of the porter to my fasting endured for the sake of books. At the little shop near Portland Road Station I came upon a first edition of Gibbon. The price an absurdity. I think it was a shilling a volume. To possess those clean page quartos I would have sold my coat. As it happened, I had not money enough with me, but sufficient at home. I was living in Islington. Having spoken with the bookseller, I walked home, took the cash, walked back again, and carried the tomes from the west end of Euston Road to a street in Islington far beyond the Angel. I did it in 2 journeys because, being the only time of my life when I thought of Gibbon as au revoir du pois, 3 times, reckoning the walk for the money, did I descend Euston Road and climb Pentonville on that occasion. Of this season and the weather I have no recollection. My joy in the purchase I had made drove out every other thought, except indeed of the weight. I had infinite energy, but not much muscular strength, and the end of the last journey saw me on a chair, perspiring, flaccid, aching, exultant. The well-to-do person would hear this story with astonishment. Why did I not get a bookseller to send me the volumes? Or if I could not wait, was there no omnibus along the London highway? How could I make the well-to-do person understand that I did not feel able to afford that day 1 penny more than I had spent on the book? No such labor-saving expenditure did not come within my scope. Whatever I enjoyed, I earned it, literally by the sweat of my brow. In those days, I hardly knew what it was to travel by omnibus. I have walked London streets for 12 and 15 hours together without ever thought of saving my legs or my time or paying for waftage. Being poor as poor can be, there were certain things I had to renounce, and this was one of them. Years later, I sold my first edition of Gibbon for less than it cost me. It went with a great many other fine books in folio and quarto, which I could not drag about with me on my constant removals. The man who bought them spoke of them as tombstones. Why has Gibbon no market value? Often has my heart ached with regret for those quartos. The joy of reading the decline and fall in that fine type. The page was appropriate to the dignity of the subject. The mere sight of it turned one's mind. I suppose I could easily get another copy now, but it would not be to me what that other was with the memory of dust and toil. Well, so ends George Gissing's My Books, and I will leave it there, BookTube, and I'll be back tomorrow with another essay.